But now, in postmodernism, you ask, what is life about? And they would say the most important thing is not to be good. The meaning of life is to be free. Postmodernism says the meaning of life is to follow my desires and my dreams. Through in advertisements or commercials. It comes through in movies. It comes through in social media every single day. My lecture today is entitled Postmodernism and Preaching. Now, I'm not going to define postmodernism. I'm going to describe it. And here's the reason why. We in the West have great admiration for the Korean church. Over the last 100 years, the Korean church grew faster than the population of Korea. So you grew from almost no percentage of the population being Christian to 10-20% of the population being Christian. Now that was only possible because you had a mission encounter with non-believing culture. So what's a mission encounter? It means you connect to non-Christians and help them see their need for Christ, and you help them see the need so well that many get converted. That's a mission encounter. However, as we are all saying, the Korean church is now seeing some decline. Why would that be? It's because you now have a new kind of non-believing culture, and you need to learn how to have a missionary encounter with today's Korean non-believing culture. You have to learn how to connect to non-Christians today and help them see their need for Christ. Now, how have things changed? Now, I am not an expert on Korean culture, so I certainly can't give you an entire lecture on that. I have an impression that you now have to deal with a materialistic culture. And 100 years ago, you didn't have to deal with so many people tempted by money and success. But there's another factor you have to deal with, not just materialism, but postmodernism. I'm going to describe postmodernism, but I don't want to give you a false impression. Postmodernism almost never exists in a pure form. So in Europe, it's very strong in the North and the West, not very strong not as strong in Southern Europe. In North America, it's strong in the Northeast and on the West Coast. It's not strong at all in the middle part of North America. In Asia, it will be stronger in cities. It'll be stronger with younger people. But I don't want you to think I'm saying that all Korean young people are postmodern. In the very same way people are postmodern, say, in Europe. Postmodernism is never pure. It's an influence. So let me begin to describe it. In all previous cultures, if you ask people, what is life about? What's the most important thing? The answer is to be a good moral person who lives life for your family, for your nation, for God, but not for yourself. The meaning of life is to do your duty and not be a selfish person. Now, in that kind of culture, you have certain what I call religious concepts. One is there's such a thing as moral truth. A moral truth is something outside of me that I have to honor. Secondly, there's such a thing as guilt and shame, which I experience when I fall short of the moral truth. And thirdly, there's usually some sense that there's more to life than this material world. There's some idea of afterlife or heaven or a spiritual world. Okay, so those three concepts are moral truth, guilt and shame, afterlife. And every culture before postmodernity, people basically had those three concepts. The meaning of life is to be good. But now, in postmodernism, you ask, what is life about? What is the most important thing? And they would say the most important thing is not to be good as someone else defines good for me. The meaning of life is to be free. Free to be true to myself. So the older way was the meaning of life is to be good. Postmodernism says that the meaning of life is to be free. The older approach said the meaning of life is duty. Postmodernism says the meaning of life is to follow my desires and my dreams. Through in advertisements or commercials. It comes through in movies. It comes through in social media. Let me give you 4 of them. You have got to be true to yourself. You have to do in the end what makes you happy. You should be free to live any way you want as long as you don't hurt somebody else. And no one has the right to tell anyone else how to live their life. Now, you're not in Europe, you're not in North America, you're in Asia, you are in a largely Confucian culture, but your young people are being bombarded with those 4 slogans every single day through advertisements, through music, through movies. I've only been here 3 days. I see them in the ads. I see them in K-pop. They're all coming through every day. That doesn't make your young people postmodern in a pure way, but it makes them different than their parents and their grandparents. And this change is happening pretty fast. My grandparents in America were very traditional people. My children and grandchildren are affected more by postmodernism, whereas my grandparents weren't affected by it at all. So that's 4 generations for that change. But you're going through that change in 1 generation. Adults in Korea are as traditional as my grandparents. I mean their attitude toward duty and their attitude toward authority. But your young people are being influenced by the very same things that all young people in the rest of the world are being influenced. And now let me give you some of the effects of postmodernism for Christian ministry. See, traditional evangelism we've all done for centuries, it assumed that the non-Christian had some of these religious concepts. Even if they were non-Christian, they had some belief in an afterlife. They believed in a moral truth outside of themselves. They understood guilt and sin. So in evangelism, you could go to non-Christian people and you could assume that they did have a sense of guilt and they knew that they were not living as they should. But the more postmodern someone is, the harder it is you can't assume any of those things. Postmodernity says there is no moral truth outside of you. Postmodernism says you define moral truth from inside. You define right and wrong for you. And of course that makes it much more difficult to talk to people about sin. And it's much more difficult to talk to them about their need for God. And of course it's much more difficult to talk to them about salvation because they don't feel they need salvation. So for all these reasons, postmodernism is a great challenge. I don't know to what degree postmodernism is affecting young people in Korea, but it certainly has to affect them in some ways. They will find it more difficult to take authoritarian hierarchy, to simply have people put pressure on their wills and not appeal to their hearts. I'd like to talk about ways to preach and minister to people who are affected by postmodernism. I'd like to talk to you about 7 things that need to characterize your preaching and ministry if you're going to reach postmodern people and non-Christian people. Okay, here's the first one. You have to watch your vocabulary. I'm not talking about how well you speak Korean. I'm saying you need to use shared vocabulary, or if you're using biblical vocabulary, you need to explain it very well. By shared vocabulary, I mean use their language. Don't insist that they have to learn all of your jargon and technical terms. Let me give you some examples. The word covenant is in the Bible, so you have to use the word covenant, but only if you explain it very, very well every time. Justification is in the Bible, and so you have to use the word justification. You have to always explain it very, very, very well in very clear terms. But there are many other theological terms you probably shouldn't use. Do you know what it's like to come into an organization and hear people using all sorts of words that you don't know what they mean? It makes you feel like an outsider or a stranger. Okay, so in English, if I was preaching and I used the word hermeneutic, that would be terrible. I'm trying to show off my learning. Don't do it. Don't do it. Here's another kind of language not to use. Everywhere in the world I go, Christians develop their own kind of pious prayer language. We use very spiritual sounding archaic words, and I know you do it too, even though I don't know what those words are. In English, we use the word blessing too much. Everything's a blessing. This is a blessing, that's a blessing. You should just say, we had a great time. But Christians never just say we had a great time. No. We say, oh, it's a blessing. Postmodern people want authenticity. They don't like you to look like they don't like you to be putting on an act or a show. Be very careful about using all sorts of insider, super spiritual language that only insiders understand. So number 1, please watch your vocabulary. You know, the Roman Catholic Church for many years did all of their worship services in Latin. But eventually people said, no, you must use the language of the people. Latin sounds very spiritual, but no, it doesn't engage the heart. Well, many of our evangelical churches, it's like they're speaking Latin. We develop our own language that keeps outsiders away. We don't speak in just simple, transparent, authentic ways. So number 1, use shared common language. Number 2, by the way, many Christians don't like it when I say this. I'm warning you just in case is my humor too postmodern right now?